The courtroom buzzes with a quiet hum of anticipation as the door creaks open and a woman enters the room, her presence commanding the attention of everyone present. Though her attire is simple, a tailored suit in a muted shade of gray, it's the poise with which she moves that captures the eyes of all who see her. Her every step is deliberate and sure, the kind of confidence that comes from experience and a deep understanding of one's own worth. As she walks toward the defendant's bench, she offers a calm nod to the clerk, who gestures to the chair in front of her with a slight motion of her hand. She acknowledges the seat before her gaze lifts slowly to the judge, seated at the elevated bench. The judge, a man in his late 50s with graying hair and a stern expression, looks back at her with a sense of indifference as he prepares to begin the proceedings. The courtroom is filled with an air of expectancy, the kind that comes with the start of a serious case. The people in the room are waiting for something to happen, perhaps a dramatic twist or an eloquent defense, but none of them expect the woman who stands before them to be anything more than just another citizen caught up in the gears of the justice system. The judge bangs his gavel twice to call the room to order. The sound reverberates through the high ceilings, and the whispers that had filled the space fall silent. He clears his throat and glances at the papers before him as he reads aloud the charge against the woman: speeding in a school zone. It's a minor violation, but the tone in his voice suggests he views it as another example of reckless disregard for the law, a case that demands swift punishment. The woman stands quietly as the judge continues his lecture, her face betraying no emotion. She listens intently to the judge's words, each one seeming to wash over her as if they are of little consequence. The judge continues outlining the dangers of speeding in a school zone, the need for laws to be respected and upheld, and the example that must be set for the community as a whole. The prosecutor, a young man with a sharp suit and eager eyes, stands to present the case. He is quick to jump in with his argument, citing the specific speed she was going, the location of the incident, and the lack of any mitigating circumstances. He paints a picture of carelessness and irresponsibility. Though the charge itself seems minor, the tone of his voice suggests he is determined to ensure that the woman is held accountable in the fullest sense of the law. As he speaks, the woman remains still, her gaze focused on the judge, her hands neatly folded in front of her. There is a quiet strength in her demeanor that seems almost out of place in this setting. Her lack of visible reaction to the accusations might be misinterpreted as indifference or guilt, but those who are paying close attention can sense something deeper, a calm confidence that only comes from knowing the rules and understanding how they work. The judge finally turns to the woman as the prosecutor finishes his statements, and without missing a beat, he begins to explain the fine. She will face a monetary penalty meant to serve as a deterrent against further violations. The words flow from him easily, as if this is just another routine case, one that demands no further thought, just a simple resolution. The woman listens intently, her expression unchanged as the judge speaks, but something about her demeanor catches the attention of those in the room. Her stillness is not one of uncertainty, but of quiet authority. She stands with a grace that suggests she is no stranger to such settings, no stranger to power and influence in this space, despite her seemingly unassuming appearance. The judge continues with his explanation. The fine is set, and he makes it clear that he expects the defendant to pay the full amount. He pauses for a moment, waiting for a response from the woman, who remains silent, her hands still resting neatly on the table before her. There is no anger in her posture, no resistance, just an almost serene acceptance of the situation, or so it seems to everyone except the few who might have noticed the subtle confidence in her eyes. The courtroom is silent as the judge waits for her to speak. He looks down at his papers, again checking the details of the case to make sure everything is in order before finalizing the decision. He is sure that this is the right course of action. In fact, it seems like nothing more than a simple matter that requires a quick resolution, yet the air in the room grows heavier with each passing second, the tension barely perceptible, but undeniably present. Without warning, the woman rises from her seat, her movements slow and deliberate. Her voice is calm and steady when she speaks, but it cuts through the room with the clarity of someone who has no need to raise their tone to command attention. She addresses the judge directly with a polite but firm statement that catches him off guard and causes a ripple of surprise to run through the room. "Your Honor," she says in a voice that is both respectful and unwavering, "I believe there is some misunderstanding here. I am not just a typical citizen standing before you today. I am the president of the State Bar Association, the leader of the very organization that governs the legal professionals in this state, and I think you might want to." The judge sits back in his chair, clearly taken aback by the woman's revelation. His eyes narrow slightly as he processes her words. The room is thick with tension as everyone waits for his next move. He clears his throat awkwardly and then glances down at the papers in front of him, as if searching for something to anchor him back to the familiar task at hand. But it's clear that the revelation has shaken him more than he'd like to admit. For a moment he says nothing, his fingers tapping lightly against the wooden surface of the bench. As his mind races, he was prepared to handle another mundane traffic violation. But this was different. This woman was no ordinary defendant. Her role as the president of the State Bar Association now looms large in his mind, and he wonders whether he had made a mistake in his initial assessment of the situation. The courtroom is silent save for the soft rustle of papers as the judge reads through the documents in front of him, trying to regain his composure. The prosecutor stands frozen, still unsure of what to say or how to proceed. As the weight of the moment hangs in the air, the spectators watch with bated breath, waiting for something to happen. But the tension only grows with each passing second. The woman remains standing, her posture impeccable, her expression unreadable. She does not push or prod. Instead, she allows the judge the time and space to process the situation, though there's a quiet intensity in her gaze. It's clear that she is not intimidated by the change in circumstances. She stands her ground, calmly waiting for the judge to make a decision. After what feels like an eternity, the judge finally looks up, his face betraying no hint of the internal struggle he's just endured. His voice is steady, but there's a new level of caution in his tone as he speaks. "Your Honor, I must apologize for not recognizing your position at the outset of these proceedings," he says, his eyes meeting hers briefly before he looks away. "It was never my intention to disrespect you or your role in the legal community." The words are measured, carefully crafted to acknowledge her status, but they feel hollow to some of the observers in the room. They know that a simple apology may not be enough to atone for the earlier tone he had taken with her, the dismissive way in which he had assumed she was just another defendant. The woman listens quietly to the judge's words, though she doesn't respond immediately. There's a shift in the room as people begin to realize the judge's response is more about damage control than genuine regret. The prosecutor now looks nervously between the judge and the woman, unsure of how to proceed in this newfound atmosphere where the power dynamics have shifted so dramatically. The judge continues, his voice more tentative now. "You have made an important contribution to the legal profession, and for that I acknowledge your position and the responsibility you carry as president of the State Bar Association. I do not wish to cause any further disruption or disrespect," he says, but his words lack the conviction they should have carried. The woman nods once in acknowledgement, her eyes never leaving the judge. Her expression is still calm, though there is a subtle hint of something more in her gaze. She has seen this all before, the backpedaling, the desperate attempts to right wrongs when someone in power realizes they may have overstepped. She's been in rooms like this before and understands exactly how the game is played. But she does not respond with bitterness or anger. Instead, she allows him the space to finish speaking. She understands that this moment is not about her, but about the message that is being sent to the rest of the room and to the legal community at large: the importance of respect, fairness, and recognition for all, regardless of position or appearance. The judge shifts uncomfortably in his seat, and for the first time there's a visible crack in his usually composed exterior. He adjusts his glasses and glances at the papers before him, trying to find some semblance of normalcy. But it's clear the air has changed. The woman standing before him is not just a defendant. She is a leader, someone who commands respect on a level he hadn't anticipated. He clears his throat again, and this time his voice lacks the earlier certainty that had flowed with ease when he first addressed her. His words are slower, more deliberate, as he tries to regain some semblance of control over the situation. The courtroom watches in silence, every eye fixed on the judge as he searches for his next words. "I believe, Your Honor, that this case is not as simple as it first appeared," the woman says, her voice calm but firm. There is no challenge in her tone, no desire to confront him directly, but there's an undeniable authority in her words. She is not asking for special treatment. She is not demanding leniency. She is simply reminding him of the weight of the moment and the importance of fairness. The judge looks up at her, his brow furrowed, but he remains silent for a long moment, the tension hanging thick in the room. No one speaks, not even the prosecutor, who seems to have been rendered speechless by the unexpected turn of events. The woman waits patiently, her hands still folded in front of her, as she stands tall and composed, awaiting the judge's response. The silence stretches on, and in that moment the weight of the room shifts as everyone in the courtroom becomes aware of the significance of what is unfolding. It is no longer just a traffic violation or a routine hearing. It is a moment of reckoning for the judge, a realization that he has inadvertently overstepped his boundaries by failing to recognize the woman's status and her place within the legal world. Finally, after what feels like an eternity, the judge clears his throat once more and speaks. Your position in the legal community is not lost on me, he says, his voice quieter now. There is no longer any trace of the stern authority he had displayed earlier. He speaks as someone who has just realized that the weight of his words and actions has consequences that extend far beyond the confines of this courtroom. The woman remains unmoved. She does not react to the judge's apology. Instead, she simply nods, slightly acknowledging his words without acknowledging them too much. She does not seek validation. She does not seek an apology. She simply seeks fairness and respect. The judge looks down at his papers once again, and for the first time in the proceedings, there is a slight hesitation in his actions. He reads through the details of the case, once more his mind racing as he considers the implications of the situation. He understands now that this is not just about the fine or the violation, it is about something much larger than need for humility, and the importance of treating everyone with dignity regardless of their station in life. His gaze flickers back to the woman, and this time there is no dismissiveness, there is no arrogance, only a quiet recognition of the role she plays within the legal system and the broader community. He inhales deeply as if to center himself, and then speaks again in a tone that is more measured and less authoritative than before. I will reconsider the fine, he says, his voice now filled with a new level of respect. I believe it is only right that I take your position into account in this matter, and I will ensure that this situation is handled with the fairness it deserves. The words hang in the air for a moment as the judge's voice fades away. The courtroom is still, but there is a palpable shift in the atmosphere. The tension that once filled the room is now replaced by a sense of quiet anticipation. The woman stands as composed as ever, her expression neutral, but those in the room can feel the subtle power of the moment. The judge's words are not just a concession, they are a recognition of her importance not only in this case but in the broader legal landscape. The prosecutor stands slightly to the side, his hand resting awkwardly on the desk, as he watches the exchange with a mixture of confusion and uncertainty. He had been so certain moments ago that the woman's case was clear-cut, that there was no room for debate or reconsideration, but now it is clear that everything has changed. The scales of power have shifted, and the room is now under the watchful gaze of someone who is more than just a defendant. The judge avoids looking at the woman directly for a moment as he gathers his thoughts. He is not used to being put in a position where he must reconsider his actions so quickly or so publicly, but he knows that he cannot undo what has already been said. He cannot erase the judgment he passed upon her at the outset of the case. And yet there is something within him that recognizes the importance of fairness in this moment. He takes a deep breath and finally speaks again. I have given this matter some thought, and after considering the circumstances, I have decided to reduce the fine considerably, he says, his voice now calm, tinged with a sense of introspection. It is clear that the earlier bravado he displayed has been replaced by a more thoughtful approach, one that is influenced by the realization that this case is not just about rules and laws, but about human dignity and respect. The woman listens closely to his words, her gaze unwavering as she processes the judge's decision. It is not the leniency she might have expected, nor is it the harshness she was initially met with. Instead, it is a middle ground, a recognition that her actions should not be dismissed outright, but that she must still be held accountable for the violation. Her response is measured as she nods slightly, acknowledging the judge's decision without openly accepting or rejecting it. She does not need to voice her approval or disapproval. She knows that the mere act of her presence in this moment has already sent a powerful message to everyone in the room. The judge now looks up at her, his gaze steady, though there is still a trace of uncertainty lingering in his eyes as he speaks again. I appreciate your patience and your understanding in this matter, he says, though his words are not as polished as they might have been at the beginning of the proceedings. There is a sincerity in his voice that was absent earlier. The room remains silent as everyone watches the exchange unfold. The spectators, the clerks, the court reporter, all of them aware that something significant has occurred, something that goes beyond the case before them. It is a moment of realization for the judge, and for everyone who witnesses it, a moment that reminds them all of the importance of treating others with respect and fairness, no matter their position or appearance. The woman stands tall and poised, her presence in the room still commanding the attention of all who are present. But she does not seek accolades, she does not seek praise, she seeks only the quiet acknowledgement of the truth that has now been recognized by those around her. And with that, the proceedings draw to a close as the judge begins to move forward with the new terms of the case. The woman stands silently as the judge speaks his decision, her expression calm and composed as she listens to his words. While the atmosphere in the courtroom shifts again, the weight of the moment is not lost on anyone in the room. Even those who had been quick to judge her earlier now find themselves reflecting on the significance of the situation. They are witnessing that this is not just about a fine or a simple legal matter. This is about power, respect, and recognition. The judge looks up once more, his eyes meeting hers, but this time there is no judgment in them, no dismissive air. Instead, there is a quiet understanding, a recognition that the woman before him is someone far more important than he had first realized, someone whose influence extends far beyond the walls of this courtroom. He feels a subtle unease in his chest, but it is not a discomfort with her presence, it is a discomfort with himself and the way he initially handled the case. He clears his throat and addresses the room once more. I believe we can now conclude this matter, he says, his voice steady but laced with a new tone of humility. He looks at the woman and his words come with a marked shift in tone. Thank you for your patience and your professionalism in handling this situation, he says. I realize I may have underestimated the gravity of the moment, and for that I offer my apologies. The room is quiet for a moment as the judge's apology hangs in the air, but the woman does not respond immediately. She does not seek to engage with the apology in any overt way. Instead, she simply nods in acknowledgement, her face neutral, her body still and poised. As always, there is no rush to speak. There is no need to fill the silence. She simply stands there, letting the moment settle into its natural course. The prosecutor, who had been standing off to the side throughout the exchange, shifts uncomfortably, his earlier confidence now a distant memory as he watches the judge's actions with a new sense of awareness. He had been so sure of his position before, so certain that the law would dictate the outcome, but now he sees the complexity of the situation, the weight of influence and status that the woman carries with her, and the understanding that even in the courtroom the rules are not always as clear-cut as they may seem. The judge gathers his papers and turns to the woman once again. Your fine has been reduced considerably, he says, his voice now carrying a measure of finality, but also respect. It will be handled according to the terms we discussed, and with that we can consider the matter closed. The woman nods once more, but this time she allows a faint smile to appear on her lips. It is not a smile of triumph or victory, but one of quiet acknowledgement of the process. She has just gone through the process of reminding those around her of the importance of fairness and respect, no matter their position. With a final glance toward the judge, the woman gathers her belongings and stands tall. She does not linger or make a spectacle of her departure. She simply begins to walk toward the exit with the same composed grace with which she entered the room. The eyes of everyone in the courtroom follow her as she moves, but none of them speak. The room remains silent as the door closes behind her, and the judge is left to reflect on the lesson he has just learned. The weight of the woman's presence lingers in the air long after she is gone, reminding everyone in the courtroom that respect must be earned and given to all regardless of the roles they occupy or the titles they hold. The door of the courtroom closes quietly behind the woman, and for a moment the room seems to hold its breath. The energy that had been palpable just moments before now shifts into something more reflective, something that lingers in the air. The judge remains seated at his bench, his fingers lightly drumming against the wood. As he stares into the space where the woman once stood, he feels the weight of what has just transpired, a weight that presses down on him with more force than he could have imagined. The prosecutor shifts uncomfortably beside him, unsure of how to proceed. After the unexpected turn of events, his eyes flicker toward the judge, seeking some sort of direction, but the judge remains quiet, lost in his own thoughts. The rest of the courtroom, which had been tense with anticipation, now seems eerily still. The atmosphere is thick with an unspoken understanding that something important has just occurred. The judge finally clears his throat, breaking the silence, but the sound is soft, almost tentative, as if he himself is uncertain how to move forward. He looks up at the prosecutor, and then at the court clerk, who is waiting for his next instruction. Without speaking, the judge gestures for the clerk to proceed with the necessary paperwork to officially close the case, but his movements are slow and deliberate, as if each step is weighed down by the realization of what has just unfolded. The prosecutor watches the judge closely, his mind racing as he tries to process the situation. He had been so confident in his case, so certain that the woman before him was just another defendant, another individual to be judged by the same standards as anyone else. But now he understands that this case was never about a simple traffic violation. It was about something much more complex, about power and perception, about how quickly the dynamics in a room can change based on knowledge and influence. The room remains quiet as the judge reviews the final details of the case. His earlier decisiveness is gone, replaced by a sense of caution as he carefully considers his next steps. There is no more eagerness in his movements, no more sense of authority. Instead, there is a quiet humility that has settled over him like a cloak. The room, which had once seemed so certain in its structure and order, now feels unbalanced, as if everyone present is still grappling with the unexpected revelation that had shaken them all. The court clerk looks at the judge, nervously sensing that the situation is not yet resolved in the judge's mind, but after a long pause the judge nods slowly, signaling that the paperwork should be completed as planned. The case is officially closed, but the ripples of what has just happened continue to reverberate throughout the room and beyond its walls. As the judge looks around the courtroom, he is suddenly acutely aware of the presence of the other people in the room. The lawyers, the clerks, the court reporters, all of them now seem to be caught in the aftermath of the encounter with the woman who had stood before them so confidently and calmly. The sense of respect that was now evident in the judge's eyes was not just for the woman, but for everyone present who had witnessed the shift in power and perspective. He exhales deeply, as if trying to release some of the weight that has been placed on him, but it's clear that the lesson has been learned. He will not forget this day, or the reminder that power is not always found in titles or roles, but in the quiet authority that some people carry with them, no matter where they stand. The judge looks down at the papers before him, his fingers still tapping lightly against the desk as his mind drifts back to the moment the woman had revealed her true identity. He can't shake the image of her calm demeanor, standing tall and composed while the room had buzzed with uncertainty around her. Her quiet authority had been undeniable, and yet she had never raised her voice, never demanded anything beyond simple fairness and respect. His thoughts are interrupted by the sound of the courtroom door opening, and a low murmur ripples through the room as a few new people enter the space. A couple of attorneys who have been waiting outside are ushered into the courtroom and take their seats, but the shift in the atmosphere is still palpable. Even though the case has concluded, the lingering presence of the woman's calm authority still seems to hover over the proceedings like an invisible force. The prosecutor, who had stood frozen for so long, now shifts nervously in his seat, his earlier bravado replaced by a sense of unease. He glances at the judge, who was still staring at the documents before him, but the prosecutor knows that something fundamental has shifted. The dynamics of the room have been altered forever, and no one will ever see the woman in the same way again. He wonders if he will ever be able to forget the way he had underestimated her in the beginning, or if the image of her standing tall and silent will haunt him for years to come. The clerk continues with the necessary paperwork, but the air in the room is thick with unspoken questions and realizations. There is a quiet tension now, as if everyone is aware of the shift in power that has occurred, even if they are unsure of what it all means. The judge still seems lost in thought as he waits for the final steps of the case to be completed, but the reverberations of the encounter linger in the space between the walls and the people present. Outside the courtroom, whispers have already begun to spread about what happened in the room. Many of those who had been observing the case from the hallway or the waiting area have caught wind of the revelation and now speak in hushed tones about the woman's true identity, how she had walked into the courtroom as just another defendant, but left as a symbol of quiet power and grace. Her presence had shifted the entire course of the proceedings, and it's clear that her influence extends far beyond this particular case. Inside the courtroom, the judge seems to be processing the lessons of the day, but he is not alone in this reflection. As the rest of the people in the room sit quietly and consider the events that have unfolded, it is as if the entire structure of the legal proceedings has been upended, and everyone who was part of the case is left to consider what they have learned about power, respect, and the unexpected ways in which authority can be exercised. The judge's hand stops its nervous tapping on the desk, and for a long moment he simply sits still, his gaze now focused on the papers in front of him, as if reading them for the first time with new eyes. It is clear that the case will not just be remembered for the decision made regarding the fine, but for the reminder that true authority is not about titles or positions. It is about the way one carries themselves in the world, and how they command respect without needing to demand it. With a sigh, the judge gathers the remaining paperwork and begins to sign off on the final details of the case. But his mind remains elsewhere, still reflecting on the lesson he has learned. The courtroom may have returned to its usual routine, but something inside him has shifted, and he knows he will never look at those who stand before him in the same way again. As the judge finishes signing the last of the paperwork, the room remains still. A lingering quietness fills the air as the weight of the day's events settles into the minds of those who remain behind. The clerk finishes their task, and the prosecutor stands slowly, his movements stiff as he prepares to leave. But his thoughts are far from the case at hand. He's still trying to process what has happened to reconcile his earlier confidence with the sudden humility. He now feels the memory of the woman's presence. Her quiet power still lingers in his mind, and he can't shake the sense that he's been forever changed by the encounter. Outside the courtroom, whispers continue to spread as more people learn about the woman's true identity. It's clear that the impact of her appearance in the courtroom will resonate far beyond this particular case. Her influence stretches into the very heart of the legal community, and now people who had once dismissed her as just another face in the crowd are starting to see her for what she truly is, a force to be reckoned with. In the judge's chambers, the judge sits alone, now his hands resting on the desk. As he reflects on everything that has occurred, his mind races over the details of the day, the way the woman had handled herself with such grace and poise, the way she had silently commanded respect, and how that respect was not earned through power or authority, but through her unwavering sense of dignity and self-assurance. He knows now that he will never see his role as a judge in the same way again. He realizes that the true measure of a person's worth is not in the titles they hold, but in the way they navigate the world around them and how they treat others. The door to the judge's chambers opens and his law clerk enters carrying a stack of new cases that need attention, but the clerk notices immediately that something is different. The judge seems lost in thought, distant in a way that is not typical. The clerk sets the papers down on the desk and hesitates before speaking. "Your Honor, is everything all right?" The clerk asks, the words hesitant as they float into the room, breaking the silence. The judge looks up slowly, his eyes meeting the clerk's, but there is something in his gaze now, something softer than before, something reflective. He exhales slowly and shakes his head slightly as if trying to shake off the weight of his thoughts. He lets out a small laugh, but it is hollow, lacking the usual warmth or authority it had carried in the past. "I just keep thinking about today," he says, his voice quieter than usual, "about how I misjudged her at first, how I allowed myself to get caught up in the routine of it all without recognizing who she really was." The clerk nods slowly, not entirely understanding but sensing that this moment is significant in a way that words can't quite capture. "It's a reminder," he says after a pause, "that everyone has a story, and sometimes we forget to listen to it before we pass judgment." The judge glances up and meets the clerk's eyes, and for the first time in a long while he feels a sense of gratitude for this quiet conversation, for the reminder that he does not have to go through this journey alone, that the lessons learned here can be shared and reflected upon by others who are also part of the legal system, who are also part of this broader world of human interactions and understandings. The judge nods, and a small smile plays at the corners of his lips for a fleeting moment, and though it's brief, it's enough to shift the mood in the room, enough to signal that perhaps today was not just about the case that was closed, but about something deeper, something more profound, that would stay with him long after the gavel had fallen. The days following the court session pass quietly, but the ripple effect of what transpired lingers in the air, as if the courtroom itself still holds a trace of the energy that had filled it that day. The judge finds himself unable to stop thinking about the woman, her quiet authority, the way she had carried herself so gracefully, without ever needing to assert dominance. He recalls how she stood tall before him as just another defendant, yet when her true identity was revealed, the entire atmosphere shifted. And now the judge finds himself reflecting on everything he thought he knew about power and respect. In the weeks that follow, the judge begins to notice small changes in his own behavior, the way he approaches cases, the way he listens to people as they speak. He is more mindful now, more attuned to the nuances of each individual who enters his courtroom. He no longer assumes that anyone who appears before him can be easily categorized based on their appearance or background. Instead, he takes the time to truly listen to their stories, to understand the broader context of their lives before making a decision. The prosecutor, who had once been so certain of his position, also begins to change in subtle ways. He no longer strides into the courtroom with the same air of superiority he had before. Now, he seems more cautious, more reflective, as if he too has been impacted by the events that transpired that day. He recalls how he had underestimated the woman, how he had assumed that her case was straightforward, and how that assumption had led to an uncomfortable confrontation with the truth. He realizes now that he has much to learn about the people who walk through the doors of the courtroom, and that his role is not just to prosecute but to truly understand the human beings behind the charges. Even the lawyers in the community begin to talk about the case and the woman who had unwittingly changed everything. They speak in hushed tones about the way the judge had been forced to confront his own biases and assumptions, and how the prosecutor had been brought to a moment of humility. Many of them are inspired by the way the woman carried herself, and how she remained composed throughout the proceedings without ever raising her voice or demanding special treatment. They begin to reflect on their own conduct in the courtroom and how they too can show greater respect and understanding to those who stand before them. As for the woman herself, her presence continues to resonate within the legal community. Though she is no longer a direct part of the case, her influence has spread in ways that no one expected. Her identity has become the topic of discussion in legal circles. Her name now carries a weight that was not there before the case. As more and more people learn of her leadership role within the Bar Association, her reputation grows. She is no longer just a powerful figure in the courtroom. She is a symbol of dignity and integrity, someone who moves through the world with a quiet strength that demands respect from everyone around her. The judge often thinks back to the moment when he had first realized who she was and how he had felt that unsettling shift within himself, the realization that power doesn't always come from titles or positions, but from the way a person carries themselves, the way they navigate the world around them with confidence and respect for others. He knows that he will never again take someone's presence in his courtroom for granted. He understands now that the most important judgments are often the ones we make about ourselves and how we view others. And so the case fades into the background, but the lessons learned from it continue to shape the way everyone involved moves forward through their work and through their lives. The echoes of that one courtroom encounter linger long after the gavel has fallen. The days turn into weeks and life in the courthouse resumes its usual rhythm, but the shadow of the woman's presence remains with those who were there that day. It lingers in the minds of the judge, the prosecutor, and the lawyers who witnessed the unfolding of something far more significant than a simple case of fines or penalties. The lesson learned from that courtroom encounter settles into their subconscious like an idea that refuses to be forgotten. Every so often, it rises to the surface unbidden, reminding them all of the power that can be wielded through quiet dignity. The judge continues his work, but now there is a softness to his demeanor that was not there before. He listens more attentively to those who speak before him. His gaze is less sharp, less judgmental, and more understanding. There is a new awareness in his eyes as he watches people come and go, the realization that each person who stands before him carries with them a story, and that it is his responsibility to consider that story before making any decisions. He is no longer as quick to pass judgment as he once was, and it has changed the way he interacts with everyone from defendants to lawyers to his own staff. The prosecutor, too, has found himself changed by the experience. He no longer walks into the courtroom with the same sense of certainty that once characterized his every step. Now there is a hesitancy, a sense of caution as he listens more closely to the people in the cases he handles. He reflects often on the way the woman had held herself so gracefully when the moment of truth came, the way she had not needed to boast or demand, but simply allowed the facts to speak for themselves. He finds himself more introspective as he considers the humanity behind the cases he prosecutes and how he too must be mindful of the dignity of those involved. The legal community begins to talk about the case in hushed tones. It becomes the subject of quiet reflection among lawyers and judges alike. They speak of the woman's quiet power, her ability to command respect. Without uttering a single word, they acknowledge the discomfort they felt when they realized who she truly was and how it forced them to question their own assumptions about power and authority. They begin to recognize the importance of holding themselves to higher standards of respect and fairness, not just in the courtroom, but in all aspects of their professional lives. They realize that they too must be more conscious of the way they carry themselves and the messages they send to others. In the weeks that follow, the judge is invited to a legal seminar where he is asked to speak about the case. Though he is hesitant at first, he agrees to share his experience. The room is filled with lawyers and judges, all eager to hear his perspective. As he steps up to the podium, he feels the weight of the moment as all eyes fall upon him. He begins to speak softly, at first recounting the events of the day and the way they changed him. He talks about the importance of humility in the face of authority and how it is essential to listen before making any judgments. He speaks of the woman not by name, but by the lessons she taught him about respect and power, and how those lessons continue to influence the way he approaches his work. The audience listens intently, absorbed in his words as the judge shares his journey of self-discovery and growth. It is clear from the looks on their faces that they too are being challenged to reconsider their own approaches to power and judgment. They begin to reflect on their own biases and assumptions and how they too can learn from the quiet strength of the woman who had unknowingly turned their world upside down. As the seminar ends and the judge returns to his office, he feels a sense of peace. He knows that the lessons of that courtroom encounter will continue to shape the way he navigates his work and the way he sees the people around him. The impact of that one case has extended far beyond the walls of the courtroom, and it is clear that the ripples will continue to spread for years to come. Months pass and the case fades into the past, but the lessons continue to echo through the lives of everyone who had been involved. The judge still thinks back to that fateful day and often reflects on the subtle changes that have come over him since then. He has become more patient, more thoughtful in his decisions, as if the memory of the woman's quiet strength is always in the back of his mind, reminding him of the importance of understanding before judgment. He finds himself looking at the people who stand before him with more empathy and less certainty. He listens more intently to their words, as if searching for the deeper truths behind the charges they face. The prosecutor, too, has evolved. He no longer enters the courtroom with the same air of arrogance that had once defined him. Now he carries himself with more humility and awareness, as if the experience has opened his eyes to the humanity of those he prosecutes. He begins to focus less on the outcomes of the cases and more on the process of justice itself. He is no longer driven by the desire to win, but by a commitment to fairness and to seeing each person as more than just a case number. He finds himself questioning the assumptions he had once made about the people he had to face in his work. Outside the courthouse, the legal community continues to talk about the woman whose presence had caused such a stir in the courtroom. They speak of her with a newfound respect, acknowledging the way she had shifted the balance of power without ever needing to raise her voice or demand special treatment. Her influence extends beyond the case, as people begin to see her not only as a powerful figure in the legal world, but as a symbol of dignity and grace. She becomes an example of the kind of quiet authority that commands respect from all who encounter it. And though the woman's name is not often spoken in public, the ripples of her actions continue to spread quietly through the halls of the courthouse and beyond. People continue to talk about the impact she had on those around her. Even years later, when her name is mentioned, it is with a tone of reverence, as if her presence alone had been enough to transform the way people think about power and respect. The judge who once held the gavel with an unquestioned sense of authority now finds himself reflecting on the deeper meanings of his role in the courtroom. He realizes that his responsibility is not just to dispense justice, but to ensure that justice is fair and compassionate. He understands that the most important decisions are often those that are made in the quiet moments between words and actions, when the heart is fully present and the mind is open to new possibilities. The prosecutor no longer sees victory as the end goal, but as a byproduct of ensuring fairness. He knows now that his work is not just about winning cases, but about ensuring that each person who stands before him is treated with dignity and respect. No matter their background or circumstances, the woman's quiet power has reshaped his approach to the law and to life in general. The legal community as a whole becomes more aware of the need for humility and self-reflection. They begin to acknowledge the importance of respect, not just for those who hold power, but for everyone who walks through the doors of the courtroom. They understand that the true measure of a person is not in the title they hold or the case they win, but in how they treat others with fairness, kindness, and understanding. And so the woman who had entered the courtroom as just another defendant, but left as a symbol of quiet strength, continues to inspire those who were there that day. Her legacy lives on in the hearts and minds of everyone who witnessed her poise and dignity, as she reminded them all that respect is earned through actions, not titles, and that true power lies not in domination, but in the ability to inspire others with quiet authority and grace. As the years go by, the courthouse remains a place of constant movement, of decisions being made and lives being changed. But for those who were there that day, the memory of the woman lingers like a quiet melody in the background. Her influence continues to shape the way people think about power, justice, and respect in a world that often seems driven by ego and domination. Her example stands as a testament to a different kind of strength, the kind that doesn't shout but whispers and still manages to command attention. The judge continues his work, but now there is a sense of calm to him, a calm that wasn't there before. He walks into the courtroom with a measured step, as if every moment is an opportunity to practice humility. He no longer presides over his cases with the same distance he once did. Instead, he approaches each one with a deep sense of responsibility, knowing that the decisions he makes affect real lives, and that every person who comes before him is worthy of respect. He no longer looks at his role as just one of authority, but as one of service to the law and to the people who rely on it. The prosecutor who once believed his job was to win above all else now sees the law through a different lens. He understands that justice is not always about a victory, but about fairness and truth. He has become more attuned to the stories of those he prosecutes, and he listens more closely to their words. He no longer sees them as mere defendants, but as human beings with their own struggles and experiences. He has learned to balance his drive for justice with a compassion he never thought he would find. The lawyers and judges around him are also changed in ways that are subtle but profound. They speak less of winning cases and more of seeking justice. They have come to understand that their power lies not in their titles, but in their ability to serve others with dignity and respect. They have learned that the courtroom is not a battlefield, but a place where lives are shaped, and that true authority comes not from ruling over others, but from empowering them to find their own truth. And then there are those who never forget the woman whose name they may never have known, but whose legacy has shaped them in ways they cannot ignore. When they speak of her, they do so with reverence, as if she were a quiet force that moved through the world, leading behind a trail of understanding and respect. She didn't need to prove herself or demand recognition. She simply lived with integrity, and in doing so she changed the hearts of those who witnessed her strength in the courtroom and beyond. The courthouse carries on its endless cycle of cases and decisions, but for those who have been touched by the woman's quiet wisdom, the world seems a little smaller, a little kinder, a little more focused on what truly matters. They know that the most powerful force in any room is not the person who speaks the loudest or holds the most titles, but the one who moves through the world with grace and respect for others. As time passes, the lessons learned that day fade into the background of daily life, but they are never truly forgotten. They live on in the hearts of those who carry them forward, shaping their actions and decisions in ways that cannot be seen but can always be felt. And in the end, it is not the laws we follow or the cases we win that define us. It is the way we treat each other with kindness, dignity, and quiet strength.